Good morning. I'm Jean Patterson, a member of the congregation here, and it is my pleasure to welcome you this morning to All Souls Unitarian Universalist Church. Well, we're out of the deep freeze and hopefully just rain this afternoon. Now, we always like to begin by welcoming any guests and visitors that we have with us. If you brought a guest or if you were a visitor, please stand and let us know your name and where you're from. Great. Glad to see you again, Scout. Others? Yes. Great, Emma. Welcome. Well, great. We're glad you're back again, too. Yes, sir. In Waldo, okay. Oh, you had a long trip then. Welcome. Others? Anybody else? Well, we're so glad everybody made it this morning. And we also like to welcome those of you watching over the internet. And we're glad you're with us today, too. Now, as for visitors and guests, we always like to make you additionally welcome by your being our guests at our lunch. And we do have a Sunday Plus lunch today immediately after the service, and you just tell them you're a guest and you eat free. And it looks like a real good meal today. That's just down the hall here to Conover. Thank you so much for being here today. It's good to see everybody.
Well, again, good morning and welcome on this first gathering of 2018. We live today in a world of so much corrupt leadership that it can be hard to remember what is possible when leaders use their power for the common good, or that there have been heroes of the moral and spiritual life who sought to lift up human minds and hearts and urge their people to strive for a better life. More than ever, in these confused and compromised times, we need the memory of those who used both their natural gifts and the accidents of history to move humanity forward on the long climb from brutality toward freedom and reason and peace. Contemplating what it is that one generation might inherit from the past or bequeath to the next, the poet Antoine de Saint-Exupéry wrote this: "In a house which becomes a home, one hands down and another takes up the heritage of mind and heart, laughter and tears, musings and deeds. Love, like a carefully loaded ship, crosses the gulf between the generations. Let us build memories in our children, lest they drag out joyless lives, lest they allow treasures to be lost because they have not been given the keys. We live not by things, but by the meanings of things. And it is needful to transmit the passwords from generation to generation." Today we celebrate our own heritage of mind and heart, the musings and deeds of those who long ago set down roots not only of this faith, but of a whole culture of enlightenment and progress. We honor the brave souls who first spoke the passwords that began unlocking the chains of oppression. And once again, we hand those precious keys to another generation. 450 years is a long time to remember a dusty document, an obscure act by a minor royal family that most of the world has never heard of. And yet the foundations of religious freedom in Western culture rest upon that act. So come, my friends, let me tell you some stories, and let us rejoice in the memory of a long ago king and queen who once upon a time changed history for the good. In honor of that memory, we kindle this chalice flame. Let it burn as our solemn witness to the possibility of honest leadership and power devoted to high ideals of justice, compassion, and the common good. May its light call us to renewed dedication to these values in our own lives, so that they may shine forth in all that we do here in this covenant community of memory and promise.
Good morning. My name is Charlotte, and I light this chalice for a free and responsible search for truth and meaning.
Thank you, Charlotte. Now let's rise as you're willing and able and speak once again the words of our community's covenant. Together we affirm, goodwill is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Our opening hymn was composed with a tune in honor of our Eastern European connections to our Unitarian churches there.
In the high tower, ringing o'er the white hills, mocking the winter, singing like the spring rills. Bells in the high tower, in the cold foretelling, the spring's upwelling. Bells in the old tower, like the summer chatter, from darting bright birds as the grapes turn redder. Bells in the old tower, now the wine is brimming, new life beginning. Bells in the storm tower, echoing the soft sound of autumn's mill wheel as the wheat is spun round. Bells in the stone tower, see the bread is yeasting for time of feasting. Bells in the cold tower, midst the snow of winter, sound of the spring song that we may remember. Bells in the cold tower, after the long snow
Now, I have a story to share with all of us, but mostly with the children. So if you all would want to come forward and sit up here where you can see the screen, as we're going to have a picture. I see a few of you out there. Thank you. Hi. Come on up. Hi, how's it going? All right. Is this everybody? Okay. Here we come. All right. It's all right. Don't run. We'll wait. Good. Hey, well, that's a good crowd. So this is a story about somebody from a long time ago in a place called Transylvania. And his name was Francis David, and Francis David was going to prison. And he was going to prison. See that fort way up at the top of the hill? That's where they were going to put him in prison. Because there was a new king, and the new king had warned him to stop asking questions and to stop talking about different ideas about God and the church. But you know what? New ideas and questions were exactly what Francis had always done, and he did not stop. And so the new king and his judges sent Francis to prison. They sent 4 guards to take him to the great fortress of Deva, and that's Deva, at the very top of a high mountain. From there, nobody could visit him, and it would be impossible for him to escape. Francis was nearly 70 years old, and for that time especially, that was a really old guy, and he was sick. He could not climb all the way up to that high mountain to get to the fortress of Deva on his own 2 feet. That wasn't going to work. So in the town at the foot of the mountain, the guards borrowed a little brown donkey for Francis to ride. The little donkey looked at Francis with sad, dark eyes, as if to say, "I'm sorry you are sick. I'm sorry you are going to prison. I will carry you up the mountain as carefully as I can." Francis touched the little donkey gently, and they all started up the mountain path. And it took all day long to follow that winding path up the mountain to get to the stone fortress at the top. Around and around the mountain, the path curved under tunnels and over wooden bridges, winding higher and higher. While the donkey was carrying him, Francis talked kindly to his 4 guards. They were good men. He liked them. They each had different ideas about religion. It was not their fault that he was going to prison. When they got to the stone fortress of Deva on the top of the mountain, Francis said to the donkey, "Thank you, little sister. You carried me very safely. And I know that when it is time for me to come down from the mountain, you will carry me just as carefully then." The guards took Francis to his prison cell, which was built into the stone wall of the fortress. And the first guard said, "I'm sorry to leave you in this place. Here is a candle so that you can have some light. I will pray to the Blessed Virgin Mary to bring you comfort." He was a Catholic. The second guard said, "Here's a piece of blanket to give you a little warmth. I will pray to the Holy Trinity to protect you." He was a Lutheran. The third guard said, "Here's a piece of bread to eat until someone brings you food. I will pray to Jesus our Savior to watch over you." He was a Calvinist. The fourth guard said, "Here's a wooden stand to keep your candle off the floor. I will pray to the one God, our Father, to bless you." He was a Unitarian. Now, Francis had been a leader in each of these religious traditions at some time during his life. Now that he was a Unitarian, guess what? He was still thinking about new ideas and asking questions. The little donkey did not say anything. She only pressed her small, soft nose into Francis's hand and looked at him sadly. They shut Francis into his stone cell and locked the bars. It was evening, so they lighted the candle for him and went away, back down the mountain, leaving him there. Francis set his candle carefully on top of the holder. When he looked around, he noticed the gleam of eyes in the corner of his cell. They were the eyes of a large snake, a viper. Francis felt a moment of fear in case the poisonous snake would bite him. And then he said, "Brother, you are welcome to share this space and my light. Let us do each other no harm." The viper glided silently across the stone floor and coiled its body around the candle holder, its eyes shining in the candle's light. Snakes love warmth, even the little bit from a candle. Later, when Francis blew out the candle and went to sleep, the viper silently uncoiled itself and slithered away. In the morning, Francis woke up hungry, but no one had yet come to bring him any food. As he ate the bread that the guard had given him, he noticed a flock of pigeons gathered on the ground outside his cell. When he had finished eating, he shook the breadcrumbs from his lap out the door of his cell so the pigeons could eat them. The pigeons came and pecked at the crumbs on the ground, cocking their heads from side to side, looking at Francis with their pink eyes. When they had picked up all the crumbs, they flew away, soaring over the mountain fortress with their wings flashing in the sun. Later that day, a soldier from the fortress brought Francis some soup. In the evening, when he lighted his candle again, the viper returned to his cell, coiled himself around the candle holder, and watched Francis through his narrow eyes, doing him no harm. The next morning, Francis had no more leftover bread to eat, and then he saw a flash of wings over the fortress, and a flock of pigeons landed by his cell, each one carrying a crust of bread. From all over the city at the foot of the mountain, the birds had stolen bits of bread so that Francis might have something for breakfast. For 5 months, Francis spent the long spring and summer evenings with the snake and shared breakfast with the pigeons in the morning from the bread they bought. As autumn turned to winter, Francis knew that he could not withstand the cold. One day, a soldier from the fortress accidentally kicked a corner of broken brick into his stone cell. Now, Francis was not allowed to have pens or paper, but the corner of the brick was red and sharp. It was his chance to leave a message. That evening, the viper watched while Francis scratched these words on the stone wall of his cell: "Neither lightning, nor cross, nor sword, nor pope, nor even death's face, nothing will halt the march of truth. What I have felt, I have written, and with faithful heart I have spoken. I am sure that someday after my death, all the untrue teachings must fall." A few days later, on November 15th, Francis David died there in his cell in the fortress at the top of Deva Mountain. Now, the king had given instructions for when this happened. He did not want Francis to have a tomb or any special monument where people could come and remember him. That might make people think about new ideas about religion and ask more questions. And the king did not want people to be reminded of Francis. In fact, he did not want anyone to know where Francis was buried. So the guards came and loaded Francis's body into a cart, and the little brown donkey with the sad eyes pulled it carefully down the winding path through the rocks to the city at the foot of the mountain. The viper watched from the high wall of the forest, and the pigeons wheeled in the sky overhead as Francis was carried away from his prison cell. They buried him secretly at night, somewhere by one of the city streets, and no one knows where to this very day. But they say that if you watch the pigeons of Deva, and if you ever find the place where they bring breadcrumbs instead of taking them away, then you will know where the remains of Francis David are resting. Now, it is important to know that this story is a legend. Parts of it are made up, but parts of it are true. Francis David was a real person, one of the very first Unitarians. And the king really did send him to prison at the fortress of Deva, where he really died. And there really are still to this day vipers that live in the ruins of that fortress. And they really did bury Francis David's body in an unmarked grave. But the words that he did actually write on the wall of his cell live on. Neither lightning, nor cross, nor sword, nor pope, nor even death's face, nothing will halt the march of truth. What I have felt, I have written, and with faithful heart I have spoken, and I am sure that one day, after my death, all the untrue teachings must fall. There are still real Unitarian churches today in Romania that go all the way back to the time of Francis David, and their banner looks like this. It is an image of a snake. See the snake chasing its own tail, a symbol of everlasting and ever-changing truth. And in the middle, a dove or a pigeon, a symbol of gentleness and peace. Now, you know, sometimes I think that the little brown donkey should have had a place on the banner too, but she will have to live in your own imagination. It's a story that's worth remembering. Thank you for being here, and now you all can go to your classes and we'll sing a song for you.
Good morning, I'm Ken Yeager, and a member of this congregation, and I've been to Romania several times now, and I'd like, if I can, briefly to take you with me on a journey there. The mountain that we saw earlier at Deva, when the 5 people, the team of us went over there in 2014, that was one of the places we went, and the ruins of the fortress are still there. And there's several members of the congregation who have been there at other times. And I've been fortunate. I have a daughter that lives in Europe. And so I've been fortunate to go from where she lives on to Romania and get to know a little bit about the place on my own. Let me tell you a teeny bit about the history of Transylvania. It is part of the country of Romania. It's, if you will, a state. At the end of World War I, the Hungarians were on the losing side of the conflict. The Romanians happened to be on the winning side of the conflict. And when the Austro-Hungarian Empire was divided up, the Allies took the portion that is Transylvania and gave it to Romania. And it would be much like somebody saying the northern half of Missouri, north of the Missouri River, will now become Iowa. And so all of the people literally in the village of Galfalva, where our partner church is, are Hungarians. They're ethnic Hungarians, speak Hungarian, and there's a ongoing low-level, I think, conflict between the Hungarians and the Romanians. When you visit there, you're going to step back in time a long ways. The average Romanian, the average Transylvanian, the person in our community, does not own a car. They may own a horse and a rubber-tired wagon. It is not uncommon to see families riding the tractor, which they may own, as their prime modes of transportation. The Romanians are part of the European Union, but they still use their own currency, and they have some other differences between most parts of the European Union. Cost of living is lower there by a lot than it is here, but income is even lower than that, and so their standard of living is substantially lower than ours. The money that, when communism fell was when the Unitarian Church started doing partner churches. And so we've had partner churches there since the early 90s, and there have been several teams that have gone. In seeing the church, I saw the church first in about 2012. And the church needed repair, it needed paint, it had shutters, and the belfry tower was in poor repair, and the wall around the church had metal covers on it to protect the stones, but those were rusted in pretty bad shape. Through the years, our church has had a budgeted amount of money which we give to them, and then offerings like today, where we give money to those folks. And it's been a catalyst for them because they've taken our funds, they've repaired the church. It now looks a whole lot better than what it does. The big crack that was on the back side of the wall has been repaired. The church has been painted inside and out, and it looks immensely better. I want to do one little quick item that tells you how far you step back in culture. There's a door in the back of the church and a door in the side of the church. And yes, the ladies come in one door and the men come in the other door. Yeah, that's the way they do it. Bila, who's the minister, is a bright guy, and he has convinced them that the only way he can shake everyone's hand is if everybody goes out the same door. So at the end of the service, everybody exits the side door. It's quite an experience to be there. I'm hoping, it looks like we probably will go again in 2019. I would love it if more people could go and enjoy the countryside. You'll see not only the fortress that remains there, fences are few and far between in the country, and they literally have shepherds tending the flock. You will see large groups of sheep as you drive around the country, and if you look, you'll see a shepherd with some dogs that follow the sheep. And there's open range, open grazing all over the place. So it's an amazing, interesting country. They use our money wisely. They have members of their congregation that have a little bit more means than some of the others, and they have obviously contributed generously using our funds as the catalyst. I hope now, as we collect the offering, that you will dig deep in your pocket and make a substantial contribution. Thank you as we now receive the offering.
I want to add my voice to Ken's The consistent support from this congregation is part of what enables our partner church in Galfalva to maintain a living ministry in this faith. Will you join me now in the words of dedication for our offering? We dedicate our offerings and our actions to the mission at the heart of this congregation, to build a respectful, caring community, to inspire personal and spiritual growth, and to create a just and compassionate society.
The first reading is from the Edict of Torda, 1568. His Majesty, our Lord King John Sigismund, His Majesty, our Lord King John Sigismund, in what manner he, together with his realm, legislated in the matter of religion at the previous diets, in the same matter now, in this diet, reaffirms that in every place the preachers shall preach and explain the gospel, each according to his understanding of it, and if the congregation like it, well. If not, no one shall compel them, for their souls would not be satisfied, but they shall be permitted to keep a preacher whose teaching they approve. Therefore, none of the superintendents or others shall abuse the preachers. No one shall be reviled for his religion by anyone, according to the previous statutes, and it is not permitted that anyone should threaten anyone else by imprisonment or by removal from his post for his teaching. For faith is the gift of God, and this comes from hearing, which hearing is by the word of God.
This is from Their Souls Would Not Be Satisfied by Reverend Kendyl Gibbons. Do you know, can you see what it would have meant to a proud, intelligent, sensitive 11-year-old boy, knowing that the father he never knew had been a great king, to travel miles and miles, days and days away from his home and the realm that he had been taught to think rightfully his own? It was then that we began the game, as the carriage wended its sorrowful way from Transylvania to my mother, the Dowager Queen, and my brother in Poland. To keep from going mad, to keep from poisoning ourselves with bitterness of revenge rehearsed over and over, we sent our fantasies in the other direction. When we return, when the crown is restored to us, when the land is ours again, what kind of rulers shall we be? What would be the best way, the very best possible way to rule a kingdom such as ours? We would play this for hours, arguing out the fine points of statecraft, of jurisprudence, of military and political strategy, but always with two questions equally to be lifted up. Will it work? And is it good? It was a game that we would play for 5 long years of exile, while John grew from a slender lad of 11 to the passionate convictions of 16. And it was in this context that the dream itself was born. For one of the questions that the ruler must face, of course, is what to do about religion. Remember that it was understood that the ruler would determine the theological opinions of the entire country and the devices for enforcing conformity to those opinions. It came slowly, a dream born of a game born of desperation.
Why should we have to choose for everyone? What did we know about God more than all those other believers who would cling stubbornly to the faith they had embraced, even through persecution and unto death? Why not let them? Why even try to force them to change? Why should not each human soul respond to God and worship God in the way that seemed best to them? And then, with growing conviction and excitement, the vision of a new way, something never tried before. Suppose a nation had many churches, different from one another, and the people could choose freely among them such worship as would satisfy their souls. Suppose there were books to read freely and openly, public debates even, where the ablest of each tradition could argue their true convictions as forcefully as possible and convince whomever they might. It was so daring, so different from anything we knew, that we laughed at first. But gradually the dream took hold of us, as dreams do, and we understood that this would be a part of our plan whenever we should return to power. People speak of John Sigismund with praise, and he was a brave and brilliant king. All that in my deepest heart I had hoped he would be until his early death at the age of 31. And in his hands our dream grew, and he nourished it and expanded it and proved that it could work. But it was I who taught him to dream. I who nurtured him in wisdom and the courage that goes beyond the field of battle, makes the mind itself daring. It was I who first gave form to the dream we shared, a woman's dream.
Encounters with the holy are rarely convenient. They usually have a bit of a fumbling quality to them as well, since it's not something you get smooth at, since practice only makes you more aware of how much you don't run the universe. I have never been a morning person, so it's a very unnatural and onerous thing for me to get myself up and dressed for appearing in public before dawn. This year, it was New Year's Eve rather than New Year's Day, which was a small mercy, but even so, not convenient. We stumble into the Rime Buddhist Center over on Penway, up the steep concrete stairs of some old church building, out of the frigid dark into the welcome warmth and color of the shrine. It is filled with prayer flags, lighted candles, images of the Buddha, and photographs of saffron-clad teachers from faraway places and past eras. A handful of folks I know from the Interfaith Council, but mostly the crowded room is full of strangers, all of whom have pried themselves from their beds to mark the turning of the calendar with this early morning meditation for peace. We greet acquaintances, receive last-minute instructions, and settle into the folding chairs. Gently, the musics of many faiths begin to lift our spirits. Native American drums and flutes, the Muslim call to prayer, a Buddhist chant, a recitation from the Torah, the plaintive chords of a Hindu devotional instrument. Words from scriptures I have known all my life are interwoven with languages I do not speak. The gods who are called upon have a dizzying plethora of names. We are not here to endorse particular theological notions, but to put forth into the world our shared conviction that peace is the best way for humanity to operate, and the will of God, all the gods. Jew and Muslim, black and white, celibate monk and pagan priestess and atheist. For this moment, we defy the intractable struggles that have formed us, and ever so cautiously reach for a place of meeting, a common prayer for less harm and less suffering. We are confused and awkward, lined up to offer our 30 seconds of the particular vocabularies of the sacred that we each represent. But our reverence is sincere and audible. And as we are speaking, the sun rises. There is an old Muslim teaching tale about the students who asked their teacher for a formula to determine when the day started so they could observe the fast of Ramadan properly. Is it when you can see a man riding a camel on the horizon, they asked. Is it when you can tell a black thread from a white thread? Until you can look into the eyes of a stranger or any person and see your sibling, the teacher answered, it is still dark and the dawn has not yet come. Would you like to visit the kingdom of God? When I try to imagine such a being, I can only suppose that if they love us at all ever, it must surely be in that shimmering moment when we babble like so many toddlers, pointing to the divine and crying with our many names to call upon its attention and mercy. There is a time for worshiping with the people who share your convictions by a comfortable margin, I know. But for me, born into the freedoms and diversities of this faith, the real challenge and the brief, tantalizing accomplishment is discovered at the intersection of our varying human experiences of reverence and accountability. It is interfaith worship that calls me most reliable into the presence of what I know as holy, as part of my particular spiritual path. And I'm entirely aware that this would not work as it does without my ongoing practice in this specific covenant community with the disciplines of our history and our tradition. That is what grounds me to stand with integrity as a full member among those gathered faiths and to speak with authenticity and authority from our unique vision for human community. Part of what I know about our heritage is that this dynamic is rooted deep in our story. And it is of that story that I want to speak to you this morning. In a few days, we will reach the 450th anniversary of the Edict of Torda. There probably won't be the same kind of international fanfare that there was over the 500th anniversary of Martin Luther's 95 Theses and the start of the Protestant Reformation. But for us Unitarians, and for all who believe in religious dialogue and tolerance, it is still a significant moment to observe. There are three historical strands that weave together in an unlikely combination to produce this particular moment. They include diplomacy, geography, and heredity. Let's set a bit of a time frame. The Muslim Sultan Mehmed II conquered the city of Constantinople in 1453, placing the Ottoman Empire on Europe's eastern border and casting covetous eyes on Vienna and points west. Martin Luther announced his 95 Protestant Theses in 1517. Okay, 1453, 1517. Up until that event, the Roman Catholic Church had succeeded in suppressing all efforts of secession and reform, and had maintained a religious hegemony throughout Western Europe. 50 years of war between Catholic and Protestant kings followed Luther's establishment of non-Catholic Christianity. In 1553, exactly a century after the rise of the Muslim Ottoman Turks, the proto-Unitarian Michael Servetus was burned at the stake in Calvinist Geneva. 2 years later, in 1555, the crowned heads of Europe made an effort to negotiate an end to the chaotic military conflict over Christian theology at the Treaty of Augsburg. As part of this peace plan, they agreed to the principle quis regio ius religio, which means whose realm, his religion. In other words, each monarch would determine the orthodoxy of his own realm, and one nation would not attack another nation merely because their respective kings happened to disagree about the proper interpretation of Christian doctrine. Europe was no longer held together by a unified church. Meanwhile, back in 1518, a daughter of the Italian Renaissance named Bona Sforza arrived in Poland to become the second wife of King Sigismund the Old. bringing with her the literature, architecture, and cuisine of the Enlightenment, along with its intellectual curiosity. Queen Bona raised her oldest daughter, Isabella, to be as politically astute and ambitious as she was herself. And when the girl was 20, she was married to John Zapolya, the King of Hungary. A year later, John Zapolya went off to quell a peasant revolt, leaving Isabella pregnant. The child was born in July, and 2 weeks later, his father died of wounds received in a skirmish, never having seen his son. The baby was crowned King of Transylvania by the nobility when he was 6 weeks old. And the young queen now found herself in between a rock and a hard place. The geography of Transylvania places it as a buffer zone between the Ottoman Turks to the east and the ever-grasping Habsburg Empire to the west. For a decade, Isabella played these contending forces off against each other, attempting as regent to protect her son's royal inheritance. She also saw to it that young John Sigismund received an extensive classical education. He spoke 9 languages, was an accomplished lute player, and a noted scholar with special interests in religion and establishing schools. In 1551, when John was 11, the Habsburg Emperor Ferdinand, with the help of the Catholic Church, was able to force the young king and his mother to flee to her native Poland, where they lived in exile for 5 years. By the time they returned with the support of the local nobles and the Ottoman Sultan in 1556, the Peace of Augsburg had been signed the preceding year. And so it was up to the restored monarchy to decide what religion would be enforced throughout their realm. Cuius regio, ius religio. And that's when Isabella made history. During the period of their exile, Lutheranism had continued to spread among the Transylvanian nobility, and Calvinism had also been introduced. It would have been difficult, bloody work to return the nation to Roman Catholic orthodoxy by force. And besides that, both Isabella and young John had been influenced by theological arguments among the humanists at the Polish Queen Bona's court. Daringly, Isabella announced that as regent for her son, she would not require religious uniformity in the realm. Let the various churches and preachers teach what seemed right to them. She left open the possibility that when John Sigismund came of age and ascended to the throne, he could decide for himself which form of Christianity to impose. But a year later, in January of 1568, at the assembly of nobles gathered in the city of Torda, the teenage king-elect confirmed that this was no stopgap measure. It was and would remain his policy. 4 varieties of Christianity would be officially recognized by the state: Roman Catholicism, Lutheranism, Calvinism, and Unitarianism. Moreover, in an early version of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, even Jews, Eastern Orthodox Christians, and Muslims were politely ignored as they carried on the practices of their own faiths. In short, no one should be punished or persecuted because of their beliefs, not in John Sigismund's kingdom. In fact, one of the king's great pleasures was to sponsor debates among advocates of various Christian ideas to explore who had the better arguments. One of the best of these theological defenders was Francis David, whose eloquence eventually persuaded King John, along with many of the high nobles, not only to embrace religious tolerance, but to dispense with the doctrine of the Trinity and become Unitarians. Some of the churches that they founded continue to this time in present-day Romania. It is certainly possible to overstate the significance of the Edict of Torda. Its assurance of religious freedom was institutional, not individual. Churches were allowed to teach and practice without government interference, but that did not mean that people alone could say or write anything they wanted. It was still possible to be punished for heresy, as Francis David would discover after King John's death in 1571. Even the more radical varieties of Christianity, such as the Anabaptists, were not protected. And besides, the idea was not original to either John Sigismund or Isabella. They got it from observing a tradition that had been practicing governmental religious tolerance for centuries. They got it from the Ottoman Empire, from Islam. If it had not been for the intervention of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent on their border, the entire little kingdom of Transylvania would have been swallowed whole by the Habsburg Holy Roman Empire several times over. What the Muslim rulers knew from experience in Spain as well as the Middle East and Eastern Europe was that public order, taxes, and competent civil servants were all of more use in the long run than theological conformity. They had learned that tolerating and protecting religious minorities was a far more stable, profitable strategy than sectarian persecution. And they had found that usually nothing bad happened when you left people's faith communities alone. I like to think that it meant more than that to John Sigismund, he of the lute and the 9 languages, who liked to sit back with a cold one and enjoy a thumping good debate about the personhood of God. I like to imagine that he had a glimpse of that same holy laughter I felt last week, when so many children of so many gods woke up so early to offer our various pleas for peace in the coming year. You can never take it for granted. There are always people, there are still people who think that their gods would like the world better if we would all agree on the same religious ideas and vocabularies. Some of them are even humanists. But they were on to something back in the day, John and Isabella and their Ottoman friends. Jesus is said to have advised his followers to be as cunning as serpents and as innocent as doves. So while it is true that vipers still occupy the rocks of Deva Mountain and pigeons still flock around its heights, it is really from the scriptures that the Unitarians take their denominational crest in what was once Transylvania. Religious tolerance is a principle both cunning and innocent. Cunning because it costs so little to leave people's consciences free, to say what it is they truly believe, to let them pray the prayers they feel are right to whatever gods seem real to them. As Thomas Jefferson once observed, it does me no injury for my neighbor to say there are 20 gods or no God. It neither picks my pocket nor breaks my leg. But it's more than just that, to me at least. If anything is true about any gods at all, and I'm not saying it is, but if it were, it has to be that all the little details and tiniest variations in this universe give them pleasure, that they take delight in all the diversities of creation, including the many names by which humanity knows them. 450 years ago, a king who was barely more than a boy, and a queen who was only a queen because of a faith she did not share, made a decision and a decree that changed the Western world, and so offered a new way for people to be a human community together. The Edict of Torda opened a window into a different perspective on Christianity and on religion, a window that has opened wider and wider over the intervening centuries. That window has opened on a time and a place where no one is burned for the strangeness of their beliefs or lack of them, where no one compels us, but faith is a gift and our souls may be satisfied, all because of what they put in motion. Dearly beloved, these are your spiritual ancestors, and their words have a claim on you across the centuries. It is a worthy thing to celebrate their vision and to lift up their memory. Would you rise and sing with me? Our closing hymn was written by one of the 20th century ministers of our Unitarian churches in Eastern Europe.
Mother Spirit, Father Spirit, where are you? In the sky song, in the forest sounds your cry. What to give you, what to call you, what am I? Many drops are in the ocean deep and wide. Sunlight bounces off the ripples to the sky. What to give you, what to call you, who am I? I am empty, time flies from me, what is time? Dreams eternal, fears infernal haunt my heart. What to give you, what to call you, oh my God. Mother Spirit, Father Spirit, take our hearts. Take our breath and let our voices sing our parts. Take our hands and let us work to shape our heart.
We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, or the warmth of community, or the fires of commitment. For all these we carry in our minds and hearts until we are together again. Now may the truth that makes us free, and the hope that never dies, and the love that casts out fear, lead us onward together until the dayspring breaks and all the shadows flee away.
Be ours a religion which like sunshine goes everywhere, is temple or space, is shrine